Good day to our viewing and listening audiences. We are delighted to welcome you to another edition of Marriage Encounter. We trust that you're doing well, and I hope you remember that very intriguing discussion we had last week. We have unfinished business to take care of. If you're listening for the first time, with me, Dr. Greene, is Dr. Braithwaite. We are just delighted to come by every week and to discuss issues relating to marriages. Our concern is to help individuals build stronger and more meaningful relationships. That's what it's really all about. We invite you to share your concerns. You can write in the chat if you're on Facebook or YouTube. Or we didn't give our address last week, but you can also email us at marriageencounter@slcadventist.org. Well, before we go into our discussions for today, we want to bow our heads and have a word of prayer.
Let's pray, everyone. Father, we are thankful for this privilege again of being here on Marriage Encounter, of sharing to those listening on the radio, to those watching on the various media platforms. We're grateful, God, for couples who avail themselves to share and to learn as we take this journey. Bless us, be with Dr. Greene, myself, and all of us as we continue to rely on you in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
Now, towards the very end of our program last week, Doc, there was a discussion, an issue, and you used an illustration that I found to be very intriguing. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I quite remember the details of the illustration, but you were talking about your spouse leaving the shoes in the wherever, and you are very organized, you're very tidy person.
Yes.
And that is really pushing you over.
Yes.
And the question you ask is, are you going to allow your spouse's behavior to make you into an angry person?
Angry, unhappy person.
Yeah.
For the rest of your life.
And that's a very important question because the reality is, in fact, some people have become so bitter over things like that, they eventually end up getting a divorce. Now, so you go to the judge, and you file for divorce. What is the real reason for the divorce? My spouse leaves their shoes in your house.
Exactly.
Now, by the time it gets to the court, it would be a lot more. But that's really the genesis of the problem.
The issue, right.
So how do we deal with a situation like that?
Right, and so what we were relating to was we were talking about the law of responsibility last week,
That's
and we were speaking about, an individual being responsible for their own feelings and how critical and important it is for you to be able to acknowledge it and then take responsibility for it. I cannot allow those shoes, and the likelihood of my spouse making that mistake from time to time is very real. So every time it happens, I now become an unhappy person. I have to take responsibility and realize that my happiness is not related to a pair of shoes in the wrong place.
Precisely. Now, we are not suggesting that you condone the actions of your spouse.
No, absolutely
we are not suggesting that you just shake your shoulders and say, well, if that's how it is, that's how it is. Not at all. What we are saying is that you must take responsibility for your own feelings, manage your emotions, and do not allow somebody to rob you of the joy of living. That's the general idea behind that. And again, because we're speaking in the context of boundaries, if you establish boundaries, you discuss the matter, let your spouse know that this is not acceptable, and even when you address the issue, as you said, Doc, and your spouse slips up now and then, well, we are human beings, and we will make mistakes from time to time. I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves, and I'm probably skipping and jumping over into today's discussion,
that's what I was about
because
to say,
it's really about, am I doing anything that my spouse doesn't like?
Right.
And how is that impacting my spouse?
Right. Again, and that's what we talk about, being responsible too. All right, you can't just operate and do any old thing because leave the shoes there all the time without any concern for how it's impacting her. So you're responsible to her, but you're not responsible for those feelings that she may have as a result of what you have done that might not be so nice. And so it really morphs nicely, Doc, even into our next law, because I think that, we have power to do certain things and we don't have power to do certain things, and we have to be very aware of that also.
Well, this law, you said the word, Doc, is, wow. It's the law of power.
Yes.
You know, now when we say power, I can hear some people saying, yes, let's talk about that.
Let's talk about power in this marriage.
People almost want to add a word to that. And with an and, power and control.
Control, yeah.
You know,
yeah,
so
yeah.
so the idea here is, as we discuss the law of power, there are some things that you do not have power
over.
to do.
Right.
There are some things that you have power to do. They're very interesting things. But before we talk about what you have power to do, let's talk about what you don't have power to do.
So when we look at the law of power, we're looking at this third law, I think it is, Doc. We're talking about what we have no power over. And we have to be aware of that in our relationships. I think persons struggle so much with this, Doc. And let me begin by highlighting a few of them. So we have no power over the attitudes and the actions of other people. You know, I mean,
I don't have any power over my
you
wife's
have
attitude.
no power over the actions and attitudes of your wife.
That's very interesting. But it's an important truth. It kind of
Right.
goes back to what we were discussing last week. You know, I am not responsible for my spouse's actions, nor her attitude.
Right.
That's right.
Absolutely. So I know that people are struggling with this right as we speak about it, Doc. I can see some people like, something isn't quite right with that. We can't make our spouse grow up. you hear people say all the time, grow up, you know.
Yeah. How can you? I mean, your spouse is an adult in the first instance, you know. So if you think that your spouse is acting childish, well, you should have learned that before you got married.
That's right. That's
You know.
right.
But the reality is, you can't change. That's an important word.
Yes.
You know, you can't change
Yes.
your spouse. You don't have power to change your spouse.
Wow. You know, I just thought about, you know, sometimes when plants aren't doing well, they're stunted. You know, you go to the store and you buy Miracle Grow, and they grow up. But there's no Miracle Grow in the context of your spouse.
Well, perhaps there is, you know, Doc, but it's not in you trying to change your spouse.
right,
And it's
yeah.
about what you can do, because maybe your spouse is reacting to your behavior. But that's another story.
There we go. Good point. Good point. Good point. So another interesting one here, Doc. We can't stop our spouses from exhibiting, as Townsend and Cloud say, I'm sorry, from exhibiting a troublesome habit or character flaw. Now, you know, a troublesome habit, we used it in the last one, the person leaving the shoes in that spot. You can set boundaries, but you cannot make them not do the things that you don't like.
Let me use another example.
Yep.
Because you don't like how your wife laughs. You tell your wife, you know, when you laugh, I'm embarrassed.
Yes.
And you go to a party and your wife gets a joke and she
And she-
laughs. And you get upset.
Right,
You
right.
say, I told you not to laugh. You know, that's interesting.
Imagine that though. I mean, think about that for a little bit. You know, you don't want your wife to laugh because her laughter embarrasses you.
So, I mean, you don't have the power to
Interesting.
determine. Now, if you think it's a character flaw, if you think it's loud or callous, I mean, that's your opinion.
Right.
You know, but if it's something that your spouse enjoys, you can't make your spouse do what you want. You know, that is introducing coercion, control,
Yes.
an element in the relationship that is definitely crossing
line.
the boundary lines.
So there are so many things that we cannot make another person do. We cannot make our spouse do. Can't force our spouse to come home on time, Doc. You know.
This is interesting, Doc, because it's a popular complaint. You know, a man is out with his friends playing dominoes. That's a popular one. And the wife gets agitated because, you know, I mean, it's 11 o'clock, it's 11:30. Well, these days, maybe curfew, yes.
Yeah, you
COVID
might get a
has changed
$5,000
that.
fine.
Some persons are saying, praise God for COVID, I have my spouse, you know. Yeah, but outside of the restrictions of COVID, And you get upset because your spouse seems to be forgetting that he or she, whoever it is married.
Right.
You know, and then when you get home, you're all angry, you know. You look at your spouse, you know, you now remember you're married.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But so we're saying, Doc, and let's talk about it a minute. We can't make our spouse come home early. How do we deal with a situation like that?
Right.
Your spouse is habitually late. How do I deal with it? Because now somebody out there who is listening is saying, Pastor, what do you mean? I can't make my spouse come home early?
Well, you know, in our discussions we've been talking about, right now we're looking at the law of power, and we're just wanting you to understand that there are things that you can do and there are things that you cannot do, okay? You can, of course, encourage, but at the same time, there is that discussion about responsibility, Doc, and that's something that needs to be impressed on the spouse. As a responsible husband, I need to be sure that my family is safe at home, all right? So I am responsible for ensuring the safety and security, and coming home after 11 every night from playing dominoes is an irresponsible action on my part, okay? So you know, there is that need to encourage responsibility. But the truth is, Doc, and this is what we want folks to understand, as a wife, your husband is out playing dominoes. What are you going to do? Go drive there, put what do you call that thing? A leash, and pull him home. I mean, can you make him? That's the point we're making. You don't have power to make him do that.
I remember on one of our previous programs, you shared that you were in conversation with a gentleman.
Yes.
And he said, I tell my wife she can't wear that dress.
Yes.
And your response was, and what if she does?
Exactly.
You know.
Yeah.
So the reality is, when we try to enforce these kinds of behaviors, again, I'm saying, and I'm re-emphasizing, we're stepping into the area of control.
That's right.
And we are not meant to control one another. Love is not forced.
Right.
The reality is, God could have made us so that we only did right things. But that would not have been a choice of ours.
Yes,
we would not be relating to him out of love, but because we couldn't do any different. You know, and sometimes, Doc, I ask people, what would you prefer? For your spouse, or even, you know, a woman, I may ask a woman, what would you prefer? For your daughter to obey you because she can't do any different, or because she really loves you? And invariably, they would say, I'd prefer my daughter obey me because they love me, right? And this is the idea. When we cross the boundaries into the realm of control, we break that law of power. And when you break the law, things go wrong. If you break the speed limit, sometimes you may think you get away with it.
Right.
You know, I mean, you know, in some places, there are no cameras recording, but you may think you get away with it and you go some other place and you drive through the traffic light. On my way to this program today, I was at the traffic light, you know. I saw the light turn yellow. And I said, as I was going through, the light turned yellow. And I could see from the opposite end a vehicle coming. And I said to myself, please don't drive through that light.
Right.
Because that light must have changed 30 seconds before he got there.
Right.
And you know, the man drove through the lights.
Came.
And I just said to myself, wow, wow, wow. Look at that. You know, so sometimes we break the laws. And whenever we break a law, we endanger somebody else.
Right.
And that's the reality of the situation. So when we cross over into the realm of control, we are making things more difficult, uncomfortably difficult for the relationship.
But I think, Doc, you used the word, I mean, a word that we can all understand as we relate to this issue of power, and that is that we do not have the power to change people. And I think that probably the sooner that husbands and wives learn, understand, and appreciate that, the approach in addressing concerns within the context of the marriage you may be more open to appreciating what we are sharing about, how you can grow your relationship by setting boundaries, and taking responsibility for your own feelings, when you begin to realize that you have no power to change the other person.
That's right.
None
That's
whatsoever.
right. Now the word power sounds like something good. People like to be empowered, right? And so, and we like to be in charge. We don't like people, but here's the point, Doc. If you could, sometimes they say that if you take a taste of your own medicine, you may get the point. So if you can consider, how would I like for my spouse, how would I feel if my spouse attempts to change me? How would I feel? Most likely you wouldn't feel happy.
Right.
So it's the same thing, it's the same kind of reaction when you attempt to change your spouse.
Right. So that discomfort that you feel when somebody is trying to change you is the very same discomfort that your spouse feels when you're trying to change them. And maybe you're not overtly setting out to change, but when you do not necessarily appreciate the person for who they are and the way that they are, that's in effect what you're saying. I don't like you quite the way you are. I'm gonna try to fix you. You know what I mean? Sometimes we ask couples in premarital counseling, if there were 3 things about your spouse, what would you change? And sometimes the list, they're like, Pastor, you don't have 3 is not enough. I need more. And that will sort of sensitize us to the fact that there may be some challenges going down the road. Because if your aim is to sort of change, I've heard women say, I'm going to make that guy into the man that I want him to be, or I'm going to make that woman into the woman that I want her to be. You don't have the power to change, but you do have the power. What you do have the power to do, Doc, is to address your own attitude to the person.
Doc, I can't resist saying this now because, you just mentioned the concept of, that going back to the premarital counseling, when we would sometimes ask, if you had the power to change something about your spouse, what would it be? I generally ask people this question in premarital counseling. I'm making the point here about the effects of change. I generally ask, I say, listen, if God appears to you tonight, you're not yet married, you're courting, you're planning to get married, God appears to you tonight, and he says, and you know it's God, so you know you have this opportunity. He says, listen, tell me one thing about your spouse that you want me to change, and I'll do it instantly. About your partner that you want me to change, and I'll do it instantly. What would the one thing be? Now you only have one answer. So think about the thing that you really, really would like changing. And, very often individuals would say this or that, whether they're too fat or they anger. I get this a lot,
Yes.
They have a problem with anger and
Yes.
that kind of stuff. And then I would ask, I would say rather, chances are God is not going to appear to you tonight with that request. So my question is, are you prepared to live with this for the rest of your life?
Right.
And if your answer is no, then hold off getting married.
Right.
Make a decision. Determine, am I getting married thinking that I'm going to change my spouse, that I'm going to fix this? Because if that's your attitude, you're in for some rough waters ahead. Before you get married, you have some decisions to make. But one of them should not be, I'm going to marry him or I'm going to marry her and I'm going to change him or change her.
That's right. So Doc, we are talking about the law of power. And I think what we're trying to help people to understand is that you really do not have the power to change anybody. And whatever idiosyncrasies, challenges, flaws a person may have. And there's another important point here, Doc, because whatever flaws your spouse has, remember that you have flaws as well.
Exactly.
Right? And so if you can't be prepared to sort of accommodate the flaws of your spouse, then why should they be prepared to accommodate your flaws? The thing that you do have power over, though, as we mentioned, is your attitude to the challenges that your spouse may have.
And even before you go to what you have power over, because I want to stitch in something else that you don't have power over.
Yeah.
And this may shock you, but you don't have power to change your bad behaviors either.
Wow. Wow.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Well, if I don't, the reality is we were shapen in sin, conceived in iniquity. So we can't, what does the Bible say? Can a leopard change his spots? You know, so that sounds hopeless. So how do we get over this?
Well, I mean, it's amazing. Boy, time is always so short here.
Yeah.
You know, because when you begin to realize that you don't have power over your spouse's attitude, behavior, and you don't even have the power to change your own. So what happens then when you are trying to change somebody else is almost that you're being quite hypocritical.
Precisely.
Right? You're being quite hypocritical because you're trying to change me, but you don't even have power to address your own issues. And that, you know, if a husband and a wife in a relationship can appreciate that reality, Doc, then I think that our attitudes to each other will be far more accommodative. We will learn to work through. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians, we do not keep records of wrongs because we all struggle with those things. You know, and so it's really important, folks, you know, as you listen today, you know, your approach to your spouse should be one that is loving, caring, and kind, one that takes into consideration each other's brokenness, and then, you know, we work together to build the other person so that we can work together as a team.
You know, Doc, I was thinking it's kind of like accepting our humanity, you know, our weaknesses, our imperfections,
Yes.
if you will, and recognizing that I have flaws, that I am not even capable of dealing with myself.
Right.
It's very humbling. And accepting that would make me put me in a better position to say, hey, listen, you know, maybe I should be more tolerant of my spouse's bad behaviors.
Right.
Because if I can't deal with my own, who am I to be making demands on my spouse? So lest you get the wrong understanding, what we're saying is you don't have power on your own to change, but you can change. You can ask God to help you. You can recognize your weakness and pray and ask for divine power for that intervention, you know, and that's the idea. But when I accept the limitations of humanity on my own self, then I should be in a position to say, listen, my wife is human, but so am I.
Right.
So let me try to be accommodating.
Absolutely. You know, sometimes when we're dealing with conflicts, Doc, we ask the other person to say, how do I contribute to the problem? How do I contribute to the problem?
That's right.
And so, you know, in any experience, you know, how do you contribute? When you are dealing with one of the areas of your spouse's concerns, you also have to ask the question, you know, how do I, you know, create scenarios in our relationship that makes my wife uncomfortable as it is from me, or from the wife? What scenarios do I create in my relationship that makes my husband uncomfortable? And as we mentioned, and you know, those things sort of help us to level out, brings about a sense of equilibrium so that we can be more balanced in the way that we approach the issues. And as we set up boundaries, we're doing it within that context that, hey, you know, I understand that I don't have the power to change you or your habits or your attitudes, but I also understand that I do have the power to address the way that I'm going to relate to you in this situation.
It's so interesting that you use the words equilibrium and balance, because before you use those words, I was here thinking of a childhood game we used to play. We used to call it seesaw. You know, so you sit on opposite ends of a long board or log, and because of the difference in weight, one goes up, the other goes down, etc. And I was thinking there, you know, that's a good illustration of how you should try to adjust to accommodate each other. Because if your spouse is heavier than you are, then, you know, maybe your spouse needs to come further up on the board so that you can maintain that kind of rhythm. We have to make adjustments and accommodations for each other. And I think the word equilibrium is so fitting there. You know, but again, our time has expired. So we're going to continue this next week. Now, friends, if you have questions, comments, or concerns, please drop us a note. You can, as we said earlier, put it in the chat, or you can email us, Marriage Encounter, that is Marriage Encounter, all one word, at slcadventist.org. We would be delighted to hear from you. So feel free to send us your concerns, your questions, or your comments. Doc, final words.
Well, as we close today, I just want to say to us, consider your own attitude, consider your own responses to the flaws, the challenges, the idiosyncrasies of your spouse. And in so doing, it will give you an opportunity, as we said, to balance out your relationship, to create the kind of equilibrium that will help your relationship to grow going forward.